Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to be doing my application presentation on Module 13, and I'm really going to be discussing the concept of biased elaboration. Now, biased elaboration is something that occurs within the elaboration likelihood model, and this is when the listener listens to a message and they think about or elaborate on the arguments that the speaker presents, but their ultimate goal is not in changing their attitude or even being open to changing their attitude. What they're trying to do is reinforce their own views and their own ideas. Basically, this means that the listener is only listening so that they can find fault in the arguments presented by the speaker. So I've experienced this many times speaking with many different people, but a time that stands out to me is when I was discussing why I didn't want my 6-month-old son watching TV with my grandfather. Now, at the time, we were living with my grandparents, and so we had to adapt to their opinions and what they really wanted in their home. And in their home, the TV was on very often. My grandfather is a big TV watcher. So when I started to talk to him about how I didn't want my son sitting in front of the TV all day, he had a very biased opinion from the get-go. And I gave him a lot of information that I had found from the American Academy of Pediatrics, a lot of information that I had found on different blogs and things that I had read online, and they all pointed towards not really allowing your children to have screen time before the age of 2 because it could mess with their communication skills and the way that they adapted to the world around them. And I wanted to protect my son and give him the best possible learning environment that he could have, and he was very drawn to the TV. So even though I gave my grandfather all of this information, it almost seemed like it was bouncing off the wall, and he was listening, but I could tell that he didn't really care what I had to say. So now that I've discussed the experience, I'm going to make some inferences. Even though I had valid reasons for wanting things to be a certain way, he was very set in his ways and had a bias against what I was saying and the organization where I got my facts from. It didn't really matter how I defended my position or how valid my points were, he was still going to hold firm in his ideas and what he believed was best. So now that I've made some inferences, I'm going to discuss how these inferences can be transferred to other areas. When communicating with others, we see this kind of biased elaboration all the time. People have many beliefs and many strong attitudes that they hold near and dear to their hearts. People have very strong attitudes about controversial issues such as gun control and women's rights, and they even have very strong attitudes about things as simple as school districts and places to live. So in all of our personal communications, we can face biased communication with our friends, with our colleagues, with our superiors, pretty much anyone that we come into contact with. So in conclusion, biased elaboration occurs when a person thinks carefully about the arguments presented with the goal of strengthening their own ideas. Why is knowing about biased elaboration important? I think it's very important because it helps us to understand why people come off as rude or seem like they're really not listening to what we have to say. And it's important to recognize biased elaboration so you don't waste your time trying to communicate with someone who really doesn't care about listening to what you have to say or doesn't have an intention of believing what you're telling them. It's not a productive conversation or effective conversation when we're discussing with people who just hold these very strong beliefs and who are only listening to poke holes in our arguments and only listening to reinforce their own beliefs. I think it's good to remember to have grace when speaking with these kinds of people and remember that this is where they're coming from, but also to be aware and to recognize what's happening. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope that this helped you understand this concept a little bit more clearly. Have a nice day.